Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to this JTED Notice of Funding Opportunity Review session. This is a repeated session from the sessions that we've already hosted for the JTED. And this is simply if you were not able to attend this session in the past, we are offering this again live. So just wanted to reiterate that. Let me introduce myself. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be your moderator and technical support for this session. So please feel free to reach out to me via the chat if you have any questions or technical difficulties throughout the JTED session. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started with our presenter today. First and foremost, I wanted to reiterate that this session is being recorded, and if you aren't able to stay for the whole session, or if you want to go back and reference a portion of this session again, you absolutely can. It is being recorded and will be posted on the Illinois WorkNet Notice of Funding Opportunity website for the JTED, and I can put that website in the chat momentarily for everyone. I also wanted to ask everyone to please refrain from unmuting yourselves as the session proceeds and allow our presenter to get through all of the presentation slides and the presentation itself. And then we'll have an opportunity for questions and comments and concerns at the end. If you do have a question throughout the session, you can feel free to post those in the chat, and then we will address those as they come in. I also wanted to let you know that we do have, for accessibility reasons, live closed captioning available at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you simply click live transcript, enable closed captioning, you should be able to see those at the bottom of your screen right now. And I believe that's all I have for housekeeping items. So I'm going to hand it off to Tammy Stone, who will present the material for this session.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in our session this afternoon. We are going to be talking about the Job Training and Economic Development Grant Program, Notice of Funding Opportunity that was just recently released. We're going to go through the program design and the elements of it, and then we're also going to talk about the actual application and submitting information for the funding opportunity. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me advance. So once again, program design overview, and we're also going to introduce to you just real briefly our WorkNet project management tools, and that's going to be what we're going to be utilizing for managing this specific project with as far as collection of data and reporting on customer services. Okay, so the Job Training and Economic Grant was established back in 1997, and it was in a response to when we had a very strong job market, but we lacked skilled workforce. So the legislation was written actually with two categories. One was for long-term unemployed, and the other one was for employed but low-skilled individuals. In 2021, the legislation updated the JTED language. And it currently addresses a similar economic environment that was experienced back in 1997, but what we're seeing right now is related to the COVID-19 environment, where we're seeing right now a strong job market and employers looking for skilled individuals, but potentially lack of individuals with skilled workers to enter those specific jobs. So this particular program is designed based upon the 2021 JTED legislation and the JCAR, which the JCAR is a joint committee on administrative rules. So that was established based upon the legislation and guides this particular program. The other guiding force of the design of this program is the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. So the funds received for this opportunity is from the ARPA Act. And that's what's funding this particular opportunity. So some of the program design is based upon the rules and regulations around ARPA and the Treasury reporting related to that. Okay, so with the JTED program, we kind of have 5 different program elements that we're looking at. And let me get to the screen here. So we're looking at, what's the eligible entities, targeted industries, targeted populations, targeted communities, and the program categories. So like I said, once again, I had talked about this in spring 2021, the JTED Act was like reinvigorated, and we reinvigorated the program based upon the new rules and regulations. And it needs to be responsive to the Illinois businesses and the individual needs. So for this particular opportunity, we have $40 million from the ARPA funding that we're going to be putting out. We have 20 million in this particular NOFO opportunity this round. And then we anticipate that we're going to do another 20 million in the spring next year. That additional money, the NOFO may change a little bit. It's going to be guided based upon how this particular NOFO functions and what we get from this. And it'll be guided based upon some particular focus groups. So the spring NOFO that comes out may look a little different than this one based upon the reactions that we get from this NOFO and based upon focus groups. Entities can apply for both. If you would receive a grant from this one, you still can have the opportunity to apply for the one in the spring. We anticipate serving around 12 to 1,500 out of this particular NOFO, out of this 25 or 20 million that we're putting out right now. And we're looking at an average cost, JTED's average cost in the original program was right around 2,500, but we could go up to 20,000 based upon the program that design and if there's identified barriers to be served. And we'll talk about it in a little bit, but we have something that's new, and this is a new element to JTED. It's called barrier reduction funding. So let me go ahead and advance. Okay, for eligible entities, organizations that demonstrate experience in effectively running and administering workforce development programs, and these can include private, not-for-profit organizations, including faith-based organizations. This can also include 501Cs, and there are 501Cs that are for-profit out there too, and those would be eligible to come in for this particular opportunity. So if you're a 501C, you would be eligible to participate. Federal Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act. So this is the WIOA. So this would be the local workforce investment administrative entities are eligible to apply for this. Community action agencies, with these community action agencies all across the state that operate programs like LIPE, weatherization, and community services block grant. Those would also be eligible to participate and come in for funding under this. Public and private education institutions are eligible. Industry associations and employers are also eligible under this particular opportunity. Now we have identified targeted industries, and a lot of this is guided by, once again, I said the ARPA funding, because it's specifically designed to deal with the impact of COVID. So we have identified specific targeted industries that we would like to see served in this opportunity: manufacturing, healthcare, and social assistance, arts, entertainment, recreation, accommodations, and food service, waste management, remediation, and retail trade are some of them that are identified. Other ones that are also eligible, they didn't come in the top part as far as impacted, but anything that's related to information technology and TDL and construction trade are all the other sectors that has shown shortages, and that we would entertain applications related to those. And then the other option is we want to really target to small businesses, because small businesses have been significantly impacted by COVID. So if you're going to be working with an employer that has 250 or less employees, you can come in with an application that's going to serve them, and you can serve any industry regardless of, regardless of the industry. So you can come in for other industries that's not listed here if it's a small business and has 250 or less employees. Okay, targeted populations, and this comes from the Job Training and Economic Development rewrite of the legislation. So the individuals that we're looking at serving here is underemployed individuals who is without a job and who wants and is available to work, underemployed individuals, and then we also are looking at underrepresented individuals. With the underrepresented individuals, we have in the WorkNet site, and we'll be showing you where you can access this, we have a list of what's called risk factors related to underrepresentation. So an underrepresentation can be served as an unemployed individual or an underrepresented individual. And then the other thing that we're going to be including in this grant is services to youth participants. So youth with one or more barriers or risk factors is also eligible to be served under this program. And I have a tendency to talk fast. So if anybody needs me to slow down, or if you have any questions, please put them in the chat section, and then we can respond to those. I'll have a break here, and then we can respond to those questions that you have. Something else that we're looking at is, and what we're doing is serving targeted communities. And this is also guided by the ARPA funding and the Treasury rules. What they want to see is services that are provided in qualified census tracts or disproportionately impacted areas. And we have the definitions there for your census tract and disproportionately impacted areas. I'm not going to read through these, but if you look at this link right down to Illinois WorkNet, we have a map, and let me just click on it and see if I can bring this up. I may end up messing something up, but we have this map here that will identify qualified census tracts. And let me pull this over here in a specific area. So you can type in an actual address in the search function, and it'll let you know if it's a qualified census tract or a disproportionately served area. So let's see if I can do this without messing it up too much. Well, it's not going to let me search, so we're not going to worry about this. But you can actually go into the WorkNet system and in this link, and you'll be using this when you start to serve customers. You can type in the specific address, and it'll let you know if they're a qualified census tract. Okay, and hopefully I'm back on my PowerPoint presentation, and I'll explain as we go along when we're looking at the program design why this is important for a qualified census tract and disproportionately served area. Okay, moving on. So with the JTED program categories, our program category design has basically four elements or four categories. The first one is the job seeker focus. So we're looking at individuals that potentially are long-term unemployed, low-income individuals that need skill upgrades so that they can access the workforce. So these are our job seekers, and it's job seeker focused. In these particular areas, you're going to be looking at providing occupational training along with work-based learning, which can include pre-apprenticeships, apprenticeships, paid work experience, internships. There's a lot of options that are related to that, along with occupational skills training to individuals that need skills so that they can become sustainable employees, self-sustaining and get the self-sustaining employment. One of the things with all of these tracks is we definitely want to look at trying to provide training that offers a career pathway that has mobility for them so that they can, move up within a job and advance, with their income also. Category 2 is the employer focus. So these are looking at upskilling employees to address the negative impact of COVID-19 and or historically inequities. So we're looking at serving individuals within those qualified census tracts and looking at individuals who are employed that were potentially impacted by the COVID-19. So they had one career avenue that they were in, were laid off, or in a job, but they're in a job that's not equivalent to their skills or their abilities. So we want to work with those individuals to either upgrade them within that employer or potentially look at a correction in their career pathway and see if we can provide family sustaining opportunities within a career pathway in a different sector. So, and then our third category is youth focused. So we're offering career development opportunities and work-based learning, which includes, once again, pre-apprenticeship, apprenticeships, paid work experience, internships, to youth that are ages 16 to 24. So with the youth, they have to be between ages of 16 to 24. You don't have to serve all 16 to 24-year-olds. You can come in and say, I want to serve 21, 22, and 23-year-olds. So you can serve out of school youth, you can serve in school youth. And that's all in your program design. And these have to have one or more barriers to education, training, and employment. And like I said, we have information in WorkNet, a document that talks about the risk factors that are associated with both adults and youth. And then something that's relatively new, or not relatively, it's completely new to our programming, is barrier reduction funding. So this is funds that can increase family stability and job retention by covering emergency costs for basic needs. So these it's kind of like supportive service on steroids. I'd say it's offering opportunities to provide a more robust assistance to individuals, be it, they need, a couple months of rent, or they need a little bit longer term childcare, or there may be some, potentially mental health counseling or guidance that they need. That could be involved in substance abuse. It could be some, some opportunity to work with them and pay for services related to substance abuse. There are fines that are associated with that. I know that in the past, like even, and that should be alleviated to some degree because of the legislation, but if they had fines related to their driving and the driver's license, those types of things. And we can also potentially look at, past school debt, to see if that's a barrier to them being able to get into training. So it's a very much more robust opportunity to help individuals to eliminate those obstacles that they're going through, that to keep them in training and to become employed and self-sustaining. Okay, do we have any questions right now? I'll take a quick break here and see if there's anybody that has any questions.
How long can training programs run in length?
So this grant is a 2-year grant. We anticipate it's going to have a January 1 of 2022 start date, and it'll run for 2 years. So basically you need to be able to accomplish your goals by the end of the grant, which would include completion of training and then placement in unsubsidized employment, or for the youth into post-secondary options too. So that you have 2 years, to schedule this out. So, you have to keep in mind that if you have like a 12-month training program, then you're going to have to really load up your enrollments early on so that you can get them through the training program and then work with them on placement after the training is complete.
Okay. How do they access the Smartsheet?
The Smartsheet is actually in the NOFO. I want to say it's under the submission information, and there is a link to the Smartsheet. So this is new for the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. This is a new way of us working with and submitting opportunities, grant opportunities to our department. So it's just not for this, it's for our entire DCEO. So you would have to go to that link. You can click on it or copy it and paste it into your browser. And then when you get into that, then you would be able to upload all the documents that are required for this application. And if you have any issues with that, just please let us know. We have an FAQ. So if you're running into in WorkNet, if you're running into issues and uploading your information in Smartsheets, please put a note in the FAQs. We monitor it all the time, and let us know what kind of issues you're having, and then we'll follow up with you on that.
Will MOUs be required for partnerships with businesses?
We definitely encourage you to have MOUs with businesses. Specifically, one of the things, and especially with the category 2, which is the employed upskilling, if you're working with a specific business to upskill their staff, their employees, you really need to have some sort of a relationship with them and an agreement, and identifying what the business role is and what the entity's role is. And some of the things that we like to see when you're doing the applications, if you're working with specific businesses, and with the old JTED, the business for category used to be category 1, which is now category 2. But when you're working with employed individuals to upskill low wage, low skilled employees to upgrade, the relationship was with the businesses. So if you're working with the specific businesses to upgrade their workforce, you really need to have guidelines of who's doing what and what the roles are. And so examples could be that, the employer is providing training, the employer is providing space, they're providing the equipment for the training, the employer is providing the materials for the training. For the job seekers with businesses, some things that would be good to look at is, their influence on the program, saying this is what we need, and making sure that you're providing a training to meet the employer's needs. And then the other things would be, their involvement as far as maybe, field trips or doing mock interviews, different types of things like that the employers can participate with job seekers to, make those relationships and get them connected. Any other questions?
Yes. So some people are asking where they can access the previous recordings and where they can access things like the budget template. All of that information is going to be on the Illinois WorkNet JTED website, which I posted in the chat. So you can find all that information on the website there. And correct me if I'm wrong, Tammy, but I believe that's accurate.
That is accurate. Yeah, and you may
Okay.
have to scroll down. So like all of the recordings going to be at the bottom of, as you're scrolling down the sheet, all of these, the
Mhm.
recordings will be at the bottom. The top part of it just gives you information about the program. To the right-hand side, it's going to give you the materials, like that's going to give you the application. We do have the application in two different forms. We have it as an Adobe, and not everybody could access the Adobe, so we also have a Word document. So in the Word document, I think there's 3 different documents that you would have to complete for that. In the Adobe, I believe it's just one document that you can open up and complete everything in that. And then we also have the budget form in there. And we have the NOFO in there also. So that's all to the right. And then we also have resources associated with it too. So we have resources related to, the equity plan. We have resources related to career pathways and that type of stuff. So you'll see that on that website.
Awesome. Someone asked, I'm trying to find the question. Can businesses apply to upskill their own employees?
Business are eligible, employers are eligible. Yes, they're eligible entities.
Can an agency do more than one category?
Yes. So you can come in for, 1 or 4 categories. The thing that we recommend though is that you have a very good application that identifies your capacity to serve all areas. And not, just don't throw everything in there thinking I'm going to try and do everything. Make sure that you identify that your capacity in all 4 categories.
And then are there space limits on the application?
There is not. There's
Believe
not.
so,
I'd
no.
love to say I be descriptive, but concise. So, many cases, they say 20, 25 pages, we want it to be able to tell the story. So we know exactly what you're going to do, but you don't need to add in, a bunch of filler. So be like, once again, say, be descriptive, but concise in your responses.
What would be the best use of barrier reduction funds?
That's what you're going to tell us. Because once again, this is new to what we've done, and you do have to develop a barrier reduction policy. So if we have a document, once again, that's out there in WorkNet that is, and actually I think it's included in the NOFO, is the barrier reduction model. So I would definitely take a look at that and use that maybe potentially as a guide. But one of the things we want to hear from you is what are the barriers that you identify in your area that are not being addressed by like other funding sources. So one of the things that's going to be kind of interesting with this barrier reduction is the field's going to tell us. This is something that we've not been able to do before. It's a barrier for our clients, and this is something that we would like to include as a barrier reduction.
Okay. Someone asked for the worksheet, do you need to use an app or software to log in? I don't believe so. It's just on the website, correct, Tammy?
Correct.
Yep. And then someone asked, so it looks like some people are having issues being able to complete it and turn it in if they're using Chrome, but you just turn it in using the Smartsheet, correct?
You turn it in using the Smartsheet, correct? If you're having difficulties with the browsers, certain browsers have created different issues, like with the Adobe PDF. If you have Internet Explorer, you can open it and access it, no problem. But if you have some of the other versions, what you have to do is you have to download it to your computer, open Adobe, and then open it from Adobe. So each browser for some reason has their different quirks. But the Smartsheet is what you're going to be submitting it in. So once you complete the application, you complete all the documents, you're going to open up the Smartsheet link, and then you're going to copy and paste the all of the required documents into that area. Now, if you have problems accessing some of the documents in WorkNet, occasionally you might get something that tells you to log in. I do strongly recommend, if you don't have if you haven't established a login for WorkNet, that you do that. And it's really simple process. You just go in and you add some information and you set up like an account in WorkNet, and then you can go into it like that way. But there has been instances where you're like, I'm trying to open a specific document and it tries to make me log in. And a lot of times if I keep canceling it, I can eventually get to the document, but I strongly recommend that you just, set yourself up an account in WorkNet.
Right. And then last question that's come through, what if you are a new CDC with only some experience based on the parent organization you are branching off from? How should that be indicated when applying?
Okay, what was that, a new CDC?
Mhm.
And you have limited, can you read that again to me?
Yeah, what if you are a new CDC with only some experience based on the parent organization you are branching off from? How should that be indicated when applying?
I think you just tell us your story, what your intentions are. And one of the things you may want to consider, I'm not sure, you may want to consider partnering with some organizations that maybe have experience. So what I'm understanding is you may not have the experience in the workforce and training realm. So you just need to tell us and be honest. And then one of the things you may want to consider is, potentially bringing in partners that have experience. So I guess that would be my guidance on that.
Great. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on then. So we're going to talk about the program services and design and what we like to see, basically the flow of, and this is for all of the programs, regardless of the category, minus category 4, and we'll get to that. But this is the flow of what we like to see. So we have outreach and recruitment, employer engagement, career planning, training, work-based learning and work-based training, support services, fare reduction funding, placement, and follow-up. So we're going to kind of just walk through each of these elements quickly. So applicants must include an outreach and recruitment strategy of how they're going to enroll participants. What is your clientele? How are you getting them? Where are they coming from? Give us an idea of what your strategy is, how you're going to get these people, in your door to receive services. What kind of established partners do you have with employers, industry organizations, other social service agencies, and any other, organizations that you may be working with. One of the things that's important with this is that we actually are training for jobs and that we have those relationships with the employers. So when we put them through the training, that they have placements and they're able to go into a self-sustaining, position once they've been trained through your organization, and that the training that they're receiving is relevant to what the employers need. Employer engagement. And employers, and what this is basically saying, is the employer should have a lead role in the developing and supporting a career pathway, and integrating work-based learning opportunities through experience. So once again, you need to have those relationships with employer. You need to make sure that you're intentional in your training and your training is relevant to what the employers need. And one of the things that is really important and is showing to pay off and be very successful is when you integrate training, so like occupational training with work-based learning. So that's where you need the employers also and that relationship, so they can go and actually have a spot where they can do some work-based learning and learn on the job the specific skills that they're going to be learning about in their occupational training too. So employer engagement is important in this particular for all of the categories, but important in the JTED grant. So once again, the competitive projects will provide evidence of business commitment and the demonstration that the strategies that will be used to engage area employers. So as I said before, you're going to demonstrate that the businesses are going to work with you, that they are part of your plan, and what is the strategy of that, and also what is the strategy for you may have businesses coming in, but for engaging future employers too. Once again, this is a 2-year grant, and you may start out with a list of employers, but we want continuous outreach to employers and bringing in new employers so that you have placements for individuals that you're training. Okay, so for career planning, successful career plan is a collaborative and ongoing process. So with a career plan, you're going to establish, and we call it an individual employment plan. It is just basically a career plan. It goes by many names, but you need to establish a plan for them of what you're going to do with services. And it's just not providing training, but what is the long-term plan for these individuals and movement? And not only looks at where they're starting from And it not only looks at what are the obstacles that they're addressing to even, get started, but then what do they want long-term? What do they want, when they're in 5 years? Where can they go with this? And how does this fit into a long-term plan for what this individual, wants? What are the goals? What are their desires? And it establishes a career plan with objectives, to reach those specific goals. And with our WorkNet system, when for the grantees that are selected, you'll see that that is how it's kind of designed. It establishes the goals for the individuals, and then establishes services, whether it be educational services or support services or barrier reduction services, to guide these individuals, through this training to get them ultimately to a position where there's, self-sustaining and on a way to a career. So basically saying a career plan and IEP is going to be a required part of this program. And then we have training. So programs must lead to industry recognized or post-secondary credentials and align with the customer's choice for a career pathway. Now, if you're dealing with youth, industry recognized credentials are not necessarily required. I mean, if you're working with them to stay in school and receive a high school diploma, that would be considered a credential. So we've had questions with that. And then the last session that we did, we said, industry recognized credentials for youth, excuse me, are not the only option. You can use other things as far as, high school completion or GED options like that too. But what we would want to see with those, excuse me, sorry, is the movement and where they're going to go next. Are they going to go into secondary education? Sorry, I had to mute myself for a second. I'm sitting here coughing. But one of the things we're going to be doing with training is you're going to look at occupational skills training and training for non-traditional employment. So with occupational skills training, some of the things, and one of the things that was included, it's not in the top 5 for the COVID impacted, but like we have construction and TDL. And non-traditional employment, like say women in construction would be a non-traditional type of an employment option. So look at the different, your individuals you're planning on serving, the opportunities that are available to them, and think about, not only just, traditional, but what can we do with it? It's with non-traditional employment. Skill upgrades and retaining. So in this particular case, and this would work a lot with a category 2, which is the employed, but employed under their skills or underskilled and employed. What kind of skill upgrades can we do? In this particular case, you can work directly with employers and they can identify their employees that they want to upgrade. And then, how do we do the retraining? So like I mentioned before, a good way of doing this is, working with the employer, and if the employer brings specific training things to the table, like their training materials or their space or their equipment that they can be trained on. So we really want to look at the upskilling for those individuals who have some skill sets, but need to increase them for better employment. Entrepreneurship training is an option too. And this is a good one. And that would be something where individuals have a specific skills or they have a desire to, do their own business. And how would you be able to help them, to reach their goal with that specifically? Job readiness training is always key for everything. It's important to offer job readiness. And 2 of the things that we are very interested in is financial and digital literacy. So those are 2 areas that, we also think are key for individuals if they, have the financial and digital literacy along with job readiness or skills as they're getting out into the workforce. And then adult education and literacy activities. So like, if we, GEDs as an option to bring those people up to a specific, level. So then you can put them potentially in an industry recognized credential. And literacy training, like ESL, is another one that would be good, and an option, to offer too. So. Okay, work-based learning. And like I said, it's been proven that work-based learning in conjunction with occupational training, it works well together. It's successful. So we've been doing a lot more on the work-based learning side, and the Department of Labor is big with, with work-based learning too. So look at incorporating work-based learning into your programs. We've got apprenticeships, and our department's been doing a lot with apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships. On the job training is definitely an option, and which we can provide a match for the employers. And I want to say we have that at 75% is what you can reimburse. Let me get down to that area. So yeah, 75%, I believe, is what we can reimburse on OJTs. On the job training. Oh, sorry. I just want to make sure I'm stating that correctly. Well, I'll post that on the FAQs. Incumbent worker training, is an option. Customized training, work experience, and internships. And work experience can be paid or unpaid work experience, and transitional jobs. And transitional jobs are usually for those individuals who are usually long-term unemployed, have a lot of gaps in their work history. In many cases need, considerable skill upgrades. But with transitional jobs, we can go up to 100% of payment in transitional jobs. And transitional jobs is something we haven't done a lot of, but that's an area that we're really interested in, especially when you're looking at working with individuals that are long-term unemployed that need significant skill upgrades. So that's definitely a component within this program. And the supportive services and barrier reduction. So supportive services is pretty traditional. What you've done in the past is their supportive services for this is related to training. So if they need something to, like bus passes to get to training, or bus passes to get to work, specific types of items related to their training and to complete the training. They may need boots to do a paid work experience, or some specific tools for a paid work experience. So when you're thinking of supportive services, think of just your traditional supportive services and what you're providing to the client so they can complete the training and become employed. Barrier reduction fund, on the other hand, is to increase the stability of the family and the job retention. So this could cover a lot more robust services. So, if somebody is without a home and they need some housing for, a couple months to get them, stable, that's something that you could take a look at. If there's, more expansive childcare needs that they have, that's something that you could take a look at for barrier reduction. Like I said, if there's some mental health counseling that they need, that can be paid for this. If there's some addiction counseling that they need, that's something that can be used in this. So it's a much more robust services that helps eliminate or reduce the barriers that individuals have to even access the training. So that's our distinction between sort of supportive services and barrier reduction. Supportive services are services that are going to help the individual, with training and get to training, where barrier reduction is to eliminate or reduce barriers to them participating too. So it's a much more robust opportunity to help individuals. With barrier reduction, one of the things that's required in this grant is that you develop a policy. And we've asked you, if you're going to be doing barrier reduction, we ask that you submit not only your barrier reduction policy, but also your support services policy, so we can see the distinction between what the two are. And once again, barrier reduction is new. So we're kind of anxious to see what the field tells us, what you guys need as far as barrier reduction is concerned. And I think can see where this is going to be something. And in the evaluation of this, we're going to be evaluating barrier reduction, and we're going to be looking for, best practices related to this also. Okay, and then we have placement and follow-up. So the intention is to place individuals in family sustaining unsubsidized employment. So this is once again where you need your relationship with the employers. You need to make sure your training is aligned with what the employers need. And then follow-up. We strongly encourage follow-up for these individuals. It's not going to be mandatory. Follow-up is kind of a difficult one, especially when we get to the end of the grant cycle. We will be looking at these individuals long-term through like wage data and seeing how they're doing. So there's some opportunity for us to do some evaluation long-term, but follow-up is pretty significant. And, I would recommend that you do follow-up with the individuals, do check-ins with them. You can still offer after employment some services to them if, if need be, to keep them retained in employment. So follow-up, is definitely key. Like I said, especially when we get longer, towards the end of the grants, it's not necessarily mandatory, but is strongly encouraged. Do we have any questions on that section?
Yes. Will OJT contracts be allowed?
Yes.
And then can you elaborate on how applicants should distinguish when supportive service funding should be used instead of barrier reduction funds on the NOFO page 6?
NOFO page 6. Okay. Hopefully I indicated that, but so supportive services should be related to training. They should be related to their capacity to, complete the training. So an example for me would be a person needs bus passes to get to class. So you provide bus passes, you provide, a month of bus passes for them to participate in the class. A barrier reduction could potentially be that somebody's engine went out in the car and they can't get anywhere. And they, maybe there's no access to bus passes or transportation or something along like that line. Barrier reduction needs to be, it needs to be justified and relatively reasonable, but it could support something that's larger like that. So supportive services, I would anticipate, hopefully your organizations already have that policy that explains, and a lot of times supportive services policies caps, policies will cap, say we'll provide this amount of money in support services, or we'll give them this amount in bus passes, or we'll give them this amount in mileage reimbursement. So where barrier reduction is going to be, should be more of those emergency higher level situations that are keeping individuals, from being able to not only participate in training, but being in a good place and a good state of mind to participate in training, if that makes sense. Any other questions?
I don't think so. Not right now.
Perfect. Well, we'll continue to move on. Okay, so in the NOFO, we have what's called the performance goals, performance standards, and then performance matrices. So the performance goals, and these will be in your grant agreement, those are going to be, I think there's 5 or 6, those are going to be number of participants enrolled in training, number of participants completing training, number of participants, and specifically with the youth programs entering post-secondary education, number of individuals employed, number of individuals retained for 6 months, a number of individuals with a wage benefit increase. And if you take a look at that, some of those are kind of specific to the category you're doing. So individuals in post-secondary is more related to the category 3, which is the youth category. Wage and benefit increase is related to those individuals that are employed but needing skill upgrades. So then enrolled and complete is related to all of them. Employed is more related to the job seekers. So in the grant agreement, we have those outlined, and or in the NOFO, we have those outlined, and they'll also be included in your contract if you're selected to run a program with us. We have the performance standard, which is basically saying, and I think this is to somewhat eliminate people that put high enrollment numbers just so they can get to the bottom line. But we're saying our standard is 75%. So and we want you to, obviously, if you could do 100%, we want you to do that. And, we'll be able to, at the end, look at performance and, even for future funding opportunities, see who our high performers are and who are not so high performers are. But we're saying, 75% is our standard, which is saying you're okay. Anything potentially below that, we'll look at it and see if there's, some, I don't know, necessarily disallowed costs. We'd have to take a look at that, but we'll have to take a look at that and see, if you failed the program. And then we have performance matrices. So one of the, we're going to be keeping these in Illinois. WorkNet is going to be our system of record for everything that's going on. And what we're going to be doing with the matrices is determining, the efficiencies of employment training programs. So it'll measure, number of people that were in an occupational training program, and, how many enrolled, how many complete, how many employed. number of individuals that were maybe in an OJT, or a number of individuals in transitional jobs, or, paid work experience. Or we can look at OJTs and occupational training and do analysis. Okay, if your program has occupational training and paid work experience, was it successful? So we could take a look and say, okay, they put these two together and they seem to have a pretty good success rate of getting somebody employed and retained. So we're looking at efficiencies with this in this particular program and getting an idea of, based upon program models, what seemed to work and what did not necessarily work as well. And once again, that'll all be kept in the Illinois WorkNet system. So, and then here, I mentioned this, but these are like the performance matrices that we'll be looking at in the system. One of the things that we're going to, obviously track too is, if you're going to be doing employment and training, occupational training and work experience, we want to make sure that these individuals are being employed in the sector in which you're training them. And occasionally that doesn't happen, and we understand that, but that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at, is, okay, they went through CD, like a welding class. Are they using those skills in their job? And then that, once again, will be determine the efficiencies and the success of the program. Okay, so now we're going to get on with, and I have about 15 or 20 more minutes because we're going to get into the GADD stuff too. So I'm going to go through this relatively quick. We have the application components. So we have the applicant's organizational capacity, documentation of need, program plan, and this could be, category 1, 2, 3, or 4, the budget narrative and cost efficiencies, and then the program implementation plan. So for the capacity, you're going to let us know the capacity of your organization, your partners with the employers and the targeted industries, your capacity to serve the targeted populations, ability to run successful training programs, key stakeholders, and current or completed projects, and then the experience of your staff. So in the application, it's a very much guided application. It asks you these questions specifically, and it gives you the area to address this. So one of the things we want to definitely look at is your agency capacity and ability to run the program. We definitely want to see a documentation of need. So why do you need this program? Why is this program necessary compared to anything else that you're running right now? And how is this meeting a specific need? And so we would definitely want you to look at LMI information and data of what this program is going to do and why this is needed in your area. And then you need we want documentation of the targeted industries and occupations and the career pathways. So like we said before, we have the targeted industries, the targeted sectors based upon COVID, most impacted. And then we also have some sectors that we're including, which is IT, TDL, and construction. And TDL, especially not right now with the supply chain issues, is a good one to take a look at. And then we also have the option for you guys to serve any industry or any sector, as long as it's a small business and has 250 or less employees. So in this application, you need to kind of identify, this is where we're at. This is what we're going to do. This is why we need to do this. This is why we're targeting this specific industry or sector. And this is why we're targeting this specific career pathway. And then of course, letting us know if you're going to be doing the underemployed, unemployed, underemployed, or underrepresented individuals with one or more barriers to employment. And like I said, underrepresented kind of crosses all categories when we're in these categories. So, and then the program plan, we've got category 1, 2, or 3. And you can include one or more of the program categories under one application. It's just going to be under one application. So whatever you're doing here, and we've had this question a lot, you have to plan, if we're doing if we're going to do job seekers, if we're going to do underemployed, or if you're going to do youth, you could do one or all. And then barrier reduction is the 4th one. And you have to plan your funding accordingly for the 2 years. So you're going to give us the number of people that you're planning on serving in those categories. And then, your dollars is going to be related to that for the 2 years. And then the budget kind of reflects that too. When you get into the budget, it's a little complicated, but we have to keep track. We want to keep track of what you anticipate spending on adult and youth. It rolls up to a summary, and the summary does not have adult and youth, and that's by design, because we want to be sure that we have flexibility and being able to move money between categories without having to modify all the time. But you'll notice that in the budget, how that we divide that between the youth and the adult. But we want to know the recruitment and the role of the employers, outreach and enrollment of the targeted populations. And if you're doing more than one targeted populations, you need to identify that for all of the targeted populations. What the career plan approach is, list of your training providers, and then your work-based learning opportunities. And your training providers need to be eligible training providers, and that's listed in the NOFO. It defines what an eligible training provider is. So they need to be eligible. We have had a question if somebody is has a training program with ISBE and it's not approved yet, can they still come in? You can still come in for an application, but the training has to be approved before we can fund you. So you have to have an approved training program prior to funding. Okay, and so then the barrier reduction. Now, so barrier reduction, it can be a component of any of the categories or all of the other 3 categories, or it can be a standalone grant. So you can come in and just request barrier reduction funding if you would like to do that. But with barrier reduction funding, this is for anybody coming in, anybody that wants barrier reduction funding, you have to provide a barrier reduction policy. You need the need for the barrier reduction fund. So why do you need this? Why is it not being covered, by other things? What's the difference between your supported service and barrier reduction? So if you're coming in for that, that's why we're going to ask for both your supported services and barrier reduction policies, so we can take a look at those and see what the difference is between those. Your anticipated outcomes of the funding. You can't do emergency cash, but you have to include that as a policy, and you have to identify how you're doing that. What's your policy around that? Is what, are you saying you can come in for $250 in emergency cash? And how will you handle that? How will you be able to track that, monitor that, fiscally be responsible for that? And then for standalone barrier reduction funding only, and these are the ones that are just coming in for barrier reduction, you need to provide the source of the training, work-based learning, career services. So this needs to complement some other funding that you have that is providing all of the training, employment training services. So what is that? What is this? What is this supporting? How is this going to complement the other funding that you're using to do the training? And then for this, the residents have to reside in or receive services in a qualified census tract or a DIA. And for barrier reduction, not just for this, but for for other things, the services, when we're looking at it, they can either live in a qualified census tract or a DIA, or the services are provided in a qualified census tract or a DIA, just disproportionately impacted area. So to keep that distinction in there. Or the individuals have to experience a negative economic or public health impact as a result of COVID-19. So if they're not in a QCT or a DIA, then you have to document that they're negatively impacted by COVID-19. So, and then once again, we want to know the area that you're going to serve, the type of assistance, estimated cost per participant, the need for the funds, and how it fills a gap. So what gap is this barrier reduction funding filling in your organization? Okay, so included with the application, you have to provide us with a program implementation plan and your performance goals. So the program implementation plan will include major activities. And when you get into the documents, if you haven't already, you'll see those categories as far as what the activity is, kind of whose role is it, and then what's the, the plan completion date, whether it be an actual date or number of months or whatever. But this needs to be, major activities. We don't want the, minute details, what are the major activities that are going to be accomplished in this program implementation plan. And it could be broken out, based upon the category too. So category, 1 has, this particular dates, and category 2. So if you're looking at this and you have to do it by category, just make sure it's distinct in your program implementation plan. Otherwise, in many cases, your outreach, regardless of what category you're doing, and you're saying, okay, we're gonna really load up, the first 5 months on our outreach and recruitment will happen throughout the entire grant, but we're going to load up the first 5 months and get the individuals in the programs, and however that works for your program plan. Performance goals indicate the goals for each training program. So we have in the application training programs. You're going to identify your training program. So if you're going to be doing a training program that say is a manufacturing, you're going to do upskilling in manufacturing, and what you're going to be doing is training individuals on CNC. We're going to know what category you're going to be training in. Is it category 1, 2, or 3? Kind of a training program title, name. What is your training program name? And then you're going to give us a number of people that you anticipate serving in that particular training program, and the details on that training program. And so for the goals, we have a summary sheet for the goals. So say you're doing 5 different types of training programs. You're going to put all of those on the goal sheet. So on one page, we'll know, okay, these are cumulative your goals that you want to accomplish based upon the 4 or 5 training programs that you're going to administer. We talked about the performance standards already. And the additional matrices, we talked about that too, so I won't get into that. Okay, and then we need a budget narrative that it identifies your cost efficiencies, and your return on investment. So you're going to analyze the cost efficiencies in relationship to the planned outcomes. Is your average cost per 5,000, or is it 19,999? And if it is that, then why? Why is that cost so much higher, or that amount? So, and you have to explain, justify, why your average cost is that. We need a detailed narrative of each line item, and the correlation with the narrative should match the budget template. So when you're putting together your budget, at the bottom there is a narrative section in that needs to be completed. So in your narrative here, it should align with what you're putting in your budget. So if you're talking about personnel costs, this is what we're using for personnel costs, and we're doing a job seeker and a youth program. These are this is what we're doing with our job seeker program. This is what we're doing with our youth program under the personnel. So that needs to align with the narrative in the actual application too. And then if you're leveraging or matching any funds, you need to identify that also, because we are looking at that, and there's consideration in your scoring when you're leveraging and matching funds. And so the leverage can come from employers, it can come from other organizations. You need to identify what that leverage is. And then a sustainability plan. So, once this is said and done, what can you sustain and how will you sustain it? You don't have to sustain the whole program, but are there elements in this that you are going to want to sustain, and how will that be done? Okay, so program specific, like I indicated, we have a training program summary template, and it talks about, what's the category, what's the training program name, what industries served, what are the goals for that training program. What's the summary of the training program? So the summary should be like just, an elevator speech. I'm sorry, I jumped. The summary should be like a high level, this is what this training program is all about. And then you go into your activities, and then if you're going to do barrier reduction fund, explain what the barrier reduction funds are and what you need them for. And then your occupations and partnerships, and that's a chart that identifies the occupations that you're training for, and it gives you, we ask for what the wages are in that. And then there's another chart that talks about your partners, and that also includes matching funds in that you can specify. And if you're proposing more than one training program, you're going to need to complete one for each training program. So we give you multiple forms of this. So you need to make sure you're completing one of these for each unique training program that you're offering. So if you're doing a category, say a job seeker category 1, and you're just doing one training program, you're just training people to be LPNs, then that's what we would see. We would see one training program for job seekers that are going to be LPNs. If you're going to do, maybe 2 different sectors, you're going to do the healthcare, and you also want to do TDL, then we would see one for healthcare and one for TDL, or we would see one for a job seeker that you're doing, and you're training people to do LPN, then for the underemployed, you want to work with individuals who are maybe like CNAs and take them to a higher level. So there's, maybe you have an LPN and an RN, which is kind of the same track. That may be a bad description, but you could have 2 different categories that are taking individuals to different career tracks. It's basically what I need to say. Okay, documents for submission. So we're going to need your DCO uniform grant application. That's like a 3-pager that just gives just the grant, your organization information. There's information as far as, who is the primary contacts, is there any, I think it may have disbarment information, and I'm sure what else in that, but it's like a 3 or 4-page document that's universal across all of our DCO applications. We need the conflict of interest disclosure form and the mandatory disclosure form. Once again, these are consistent across all of our grants. If you've applied for grants before, you've seen this. We need the JTED program NOFO application. So this is the guided application that we put together for you. You could do it in the Adobe PDF file, or you can do it in the Word documents. With a Word document, I believe there's 3 different documents you have to complete for that. We need the JTED program summary document, JTED program summary. I need to check on that because the summary document is within the applications. I don't think this actually needs to be here, but the application has the program summaries within it. We need the equity and employment plan. So you do have to develop an equity and employment plan. There is some resources on WorkNet that under equity, we do not give you an example plan. This is something for you guys to create and send in to us. We need your barrier reduction funding policy. If you're asking for it, you need to send us the policy. And we do have an example of things that would be included in barrier reduction, and I believe that's in the NOFO. If you're going to do barrier reduction, you need to also include your support services policy, so we can compare between the two. Resumes of program staff that will be responsible for running the program, and any memorandums of understanding that you have. So if you're working with a training provider that's going to be doing this, if you have a memorandum of understanding, it'd be a good idea to include that in there. Like you said, with employers, if you have like 5 employers that that you're going to be working with, outline the roles and responsibilities of the employer and the roles and responsibilities of your entity, so that we can take a look at that. And that really is a really good way of showing employer engagement for us, which is important. So I would, strongly recommend that. And then the unified grant budget template. And those are all included in the WorkNet site. Okay, so for review, application capacity is going to be 20% of the review points, documentation of need 30%, quality of program plan 40%, and then the budget and efficiency is 10%. So the quality of your program is really that and the budget are the 2 driving. That's half of the points that we'll be looking at. So we want to make sure that you have really good quality programs and that your budget is reflective of what you're doing with that. So that is just a breakout of that. And we also provide the actual tool, the matrix that we're going to be using to measure this. And it is also included on the WorkNet site. Okay, so submission, the deadline for this is 5 p.m. Central Time, October 29th. Don't come in at 5:01 or 5:02 because we will not review those. Recommendation is 24 hours before the deadline. I've been put in a position before where we were on the clock and it's not fun to get that in at the deadline, especially when you put all of this work into it. And then the only reason you're disqualified is because you come in 5 minutes late. So rule of thumb, 24 hours before the deadline is, submit the application. So, and especially if you have any technology issues, because that happens. So, last thing you want is your computer to shut down, and you've only got 30 minutes to submit it. So definitely recommend 24-hour before the deadline. The grant application and the forms are on this site, and that's included in your chat. So, go to that, all the information, and this PowerPoint and the recordings of these sessions are included on that site also. Okay, does anybody else have questions? If not, we're going to get into the workforce grants 101.
Yeah, we do have some questions, Tammy. What is the average minimum and maximum amount of the grant award?
I think we say in the 500,000 to 750,000, and that is for the entire application. So I've had that question before. Is that for a category? No, that's the application. So, unless you come in with a completely outstanding application where, and there is room for, once we go through this selection process, there's negotiations too. So there's an opportunity in negotiations where, in a lot of cases we'll negotiate down, but we could negotiate up too, depending upon what the scope of the project is. But 500, we said around 500 to 750,000.
Okay. Does an organization have to be approved or vetted before submitting a grant proposal?
I'm not as sure as, I don't know what you mean by approved or vetted, and Tamika may go into that, but there is requirements through the GATA process, for getting grants. So, and that may be something that Tamika can talk about. But there are certain things that you have to have done to be able to get a grant through our department.
Okay. What is considered an approved training program?
Now, approved training programs, and that is in the NOFO. So it has to have accreditation from, a body. So it could be like ISBE, ICCB, some industry sector that recognizes the credentials. So it has to be something that is a recognized body that's approving that credential. There's a lot of not a lot. I'm just saying there are organizations that, like credential factories, I guess they would call out there, that you come out with a credential, like say even a CNA, and they cannot work as a CNA because they don't meet the requirements for that. So it has to be recognized.
Is landscaping considered to be an in-demand sector, especially if we can show a career pathway that leads to entrepreneurship, certifications, and/or higher earnings?
I would say that would be something that you just put in your application, and you have to explain. It doesn't. As far as the NASDAQ, I'm not sure exactly where that fits. I'm not sure if that would be probably not under construction, or, but you would have to include that in your application and justify it for us.
Okay. And then the NOFO has target population and targeted communities. Does the target population have to live in the targeted communities?
No, not necessarily. Now with the ARPA money, and this is driven by COVID, one of the things in the Treasury reporting is either services provided in a qualified census tract or disproportionately impacted area, or customers that residing in those. So that is a priority. But if you have a customer that has been negatively impacted by COVID, that is not in one of those areas, they can still be served. You just have to identify how they were negatively impacted.
Okay, that is all the questions.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much. And I am going to turn it over to Tamika. Tamika, are you available?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Okay, perfect. And I'm driving it, Tamika. So if you just want to let me know when to advance, I will move the screens for you.
Perfect, sounds good.
Thank you, everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone. For this section of the presentation, we are going to review grant submission requirements and provide a high-level overview of GATA. Next slide, please. So earlier, Tammy provided a list of all the documents required with submission of the JTED grant application. The documents that you see listed on this slide are the standard documents and applications that you will see required for grant submissions for state funding grant programs within DCEO. We have already reviewed the NOFO, especially related to the JTED grant, and we will discuss the application, the budget template, and also the notice of state award as we proceed through the presentation. Next slide, please. So there are 3 cycles when looking at the full process of a grant. You have the pre-award, award, and post-award. For this presentation, we will focus heavily on the pre-award process and requirements. Next slide, please. So GATA is landmark legislation that will increase accountability and transparency in the use of grant funds, while also reducing the administrative burden on both state agencies and grantees through the adoption of the federal grant guidance and regulations that you will see outlined if you go and review 2 CFR Part 200, the uniform requirements. And throughout the presentation, we will continue to show how GATA is incorporated in the grant process. Next slide, please. So the grantee pre-award requirements. Grantees must go through the pre-award requirements prior to a grant award being executed. So all grantees must be registered with the state of Illinois. For a pre-qualification, all entities must be qualified to do business with the state of Illinois. And we will go, in the next couple slides, we'll go more in depth on what that process looks like and do a walkthrough of all the pre-requirements that an entity must be qualified for in order to receive a grant award. Grantees also must complete an internal control questionnaire, or ICQ. This serves as the fiscal administrative risk assessment. All state agencies will utilize the results of the ICQ. So if your organization has already completed the ICQ, you don't have to complete this again. Each awarding state agency can access those results. But when it comes to programmatic risk assessments, entities must complete a programmatic risk assessment for each grant award, and those are administered by each awarding agency. And then you will most likely see mandatory disclosures and conflict of interest documents. There is a mandatory disclosure document associated with the JTED. So please review the NOFO, as mentioned before, to ensure that you include that document in your submission as well. This document is usually to confirm or certify that the entity hasn't violated any state or federal laws. Some examples is like fraud or bribery that may affect awarding the grant to the organization. Next slide, please. So we will discuss indirect cost rate election as well, but I do want to reference the grants.illinois.gov website. Within that website, if you go under the grantee links tab, and that will give you all access to the GATA portal, but also all of the tabs that you see: authentication, registration, pre-qualification, fiscal and administrative risk assessment. Going to that website, it gives you a more in-depth overview of all those pre-award requirements. And they also list a detailed definition of each step and process. Next slide, please. So going back to the pre-qualification process, an entity must have all the following verified in order to receive a state award. So the pre-qualification status is verified after the grantee completes the registration process. And as you're going through that pre-qualification process, everything is verified and completed nightly. If there's an issue with the pre-qualification process, if any of those items listed on this slide are outdated or need to be updated, or the DUNS number is invalid, the entities will receive an email through the GATA portal that will state the issue and provide support on correcting that issue. So in order to proceed throughout the process, entities must have a valid DUNS number. You must be current on your SAM.gov account, in good standing with the Secretary of State. Entities on the federal excluded parties list are not eligible to do business with the state of Illinois. Next slide, please. So again, as mentioned, if there are no issues, the GATA portal will send an email to communicate qualified status next to each of those pre-qualification requirements. If there are issues, you will receive emails from the portal on what that issue is and support on getting that updated. Next slide, please. So as stated earlier, the fiscal risk assessment is completed once annually by the entity, and each awarding agency will utilize the results of the internal control questionnaire. This allows the awarding agency to have a better understanding of the entity's fiscal and administrative oversight, internal controls, and functions. Based on the results, this will determine if the awarding agency will need to add any specific conditions or additional monitoring. So again, the fiscal risk assessment, or ICQ, that is automated and uniform across all grant programs. So the entity will need to complete that only once on an annual basis. The programmatic risk assessment will be unique to each awarding agency in NOFO. And based on those results, for example, if the risk assessment results show that the entity had issues with not being able to meet reporting requirements, there may be some special conditions or additional monitoring may be applied to the grant award to kind of oversee that area of concern as a result of completing that ICQ and or the programmatic risk assessment. Next slide, please. So indirect cost rate selection. All grantees receiving awards from state awarding agencies must enter an indirect cost rate in order to receive indirect cost rate reimbursement. And it's also a part of the pre-required process in order to receive a state award as well. So entities have 4 options to choose from when it comes to electing an indirect cost rate. The entity can elect to negotiate an indirect cost rate with the state of Illinois. This option requires an indirect cost rate election to be made in the CAR system. The entity will have to submit the proposal, and supporting documentations will be developed by the grantee and submitted through the system. Entities may also elect to choose the de minimis rate. And so this is 10% of your modified total cost, total direct costs. And then also once elected, if you elect the 10% de minimis rate, this will remain in effect until the grantee decides to change their election. For entities that have federal negotiated indirect cost rate agreements with if they receive direct federal grant funding and they have negotiated rates approved with that federal awarding agency, you can apply that same rate to your grant proposal as well. And then there's an option to decline. If the entity does not want to be reimbursed for any indirect cost reimbursements from their state grant award, they can decline to elect the rate as well. Next slide, please. Again, visit grant.illinois.gov and talking about your indirect cost rate. This website also provides a more in-depth overview of the process when making your election. And you'll also see training modules and templates for all grantees as well. Just remember that if you currently do not have an election, have made an election for your indirect cost rate, you must do so within 3 months after the effective date of the state award, but you must make that election on all of your documentations associated with your grant submission process. So as we talk about the budget and the application, you do need to make that election on how you are going to utilize your indirect cost expenditures and reimbursements. And then also it is an annual submission requirement, and those annual submissions must be received within 6 months after the grantee's fiscal year end. Next slide, please. So Tammy also talked about the uniform application for state grant assistance. So I'll go over this briefly. This application is about a 4-page document that includes the following information: the state awarding information. You'll see the catalog of state financial assistance number and title listed for the grant. The grantee will have to enter in the EIN number, DUNS, SAM cage code, address, proposed project term, and total funding request. There is also certification, so the representative of the entity or organization will have to sign the document verifying that all of the information and statements entered on the application are true and accurate. Next slide, please. So the budget template. Again, this is also listed on the JTED NOFO website. The grant is utilizing the uniform budget template. The budget template will include all allowable budgeted line items, along with definitions of those line items based on uniform administrative guidelines. When thinking of budgeting for your expenditures for your grant, please ensure that all your budgeted expenditures are allowable, reasonable, and allocable. And we'll discuss that over the next few slides. Next slide, please. So allowable costs. Allowable costs is outlined in detail if you visit 2 CFR 200.403. But any expenditures budgeted for the grant award must be reasonable and necessary to carry out the performance of the grant. These expenditures should also be explained in great detail when you are completing your uniform budget template, and also itemized to show the breakout of how you arrive to your total cost for all your budgeted line items. So if you are not familiar with allowable costs as is defined in 2 CFR 200.403, please reference this guideline to become more familiar and ensure that the items that you're budgeting for your grant do align with the federal uniform guidance as well. Next slide, please. So throughout the JTED NOFO, there are several references regarding allowable costs that entities can include within their proposal and budget. Some of the allowable costs are expenses related to skills training and work-based learning to the individuals within the targeted populations, program participant wages, curriculum design and materials, and also grant administration requirements. I would also reference Appendix D of the JTED NOFO to review all of the budgeted line item definitions. And you'll also see similar content when you're going through your uniform budget template that's associated with the grant as well. Next slide, please. Reasonable costs. So again, reasonable cost is part of uniform guidance, and that is outlined in 2 CFR 200.404 for a more detailed overview. But reasonable cost means that a cost in nature and amount is not in excess of what would be incurred by an ordinary prudent person in conduct of a business. So sometimes a way to determine if a cost is reasonable, you can ask yourself some of the following questions. Is this cost necessary for the performance of the grant award? Does incurring this cost violate the restraints or requirements imposed by the federal or state laws, or also the regulations associated with the agency's terms and conditions? So when budgeting for your expenditures for your grants and looking at the cost and the reasonableness of the cost. Each line item should be able to carry out the performance of the grant. We should see some of that detail within your work plans, things of that nature. But please be sure that when looking at the cost, that you are kind of using some sort of methodology to determine that this is reasonable for your grant. Next slide, please. So all costs associated with the grant must be allocable. So within your budgeted approved line items for your grants, when costs are associated with those grants and executed, those costs should be able to be allocated within those budgeted line items. So again, the cost must be reasonable and necessary to carry out the grant and must be associated with your approved budgeted line items. And you can also review allocable costs within uniform guidance as well, and that is 2 CFR 200.405. Next slide, please. So typically when looking at the different types of costs for your grant program, we have 2 types of costs. You have your direct and you have your indirect. Your direct costs are usually directly linked to the functions of carrying out the grant award. So like your personnel, wages and salaries, supplies, contractual services, etc. All the costs and expenditures that's directly associated with carrying out your grant program. When thinking of your indirect costs, these usually represent expenditures that are not readily identified directly with the grant award, but definitely are necessary to carry out the grant. So for instance, your accounting personnel, if there's any shared rental expenses across your programs, things of that nature. There are definitely expenses that are needed for the function of the grant, but not associated with the direct functions. Next slide, please. And I'm gonna try to get through the remainder of the slides fairly quickly so that we can take more questions on this section. So your uniform budget template has 3 sections. Section A usually is the section that allows the summary of the grant funds requested. So as you are completing your individual budgeted line items, you will see section A totaling up those expenditures to give a full summary of how much is associated with each budgeted line item. And then also it will calculate the total state funding requested for the grant as well. In section B, that is your opportunity to add any funds that you're going to leverage or match that will be associated with the grant. And then again, there is that certification tab as well. So the CFO and executive director or equivalent roles associated with the grant, those 2 individuals must complete and sign off on that information to just confirm that the information submitted is accurate and true. Next slide, please. So section A. So section A also, when you're looking at your summary of your expenditures and also total amount of state funds requested, any items, line items that are grayed out are not allowable for that grant. So in any areas that you are not able to add any expenditures or budget narrative to, that means that is not allowable for the grants. Again, you will see the definitions of each budgeted line item, and they do align with uniform guidance as well. And then the budget narrative boxes are there to provide great detail of your budgeted expenditures and how you're going to utilize them to carry out the grant award. Next slide, please. So as Tammy also mentioned earlier in her presentation, the Uniform Grant Agreement is associated as part of the grant award. So the Uniform Grant Agreement is divided in 3 parts, and then there's also exhibits as well. So part 1 contains the uniform requirements applicable to all awards in the state of Illinois. So as you look at the articles outlined in this slide before you, these are part of the standard requirements for all of our grant awards. And if you go to the next slide, Tammy, you'll see that there's more articles that you will see as well. Next slide, please. So then we get to the exhibits. And the exhibits provide more specific detail to the actual grant that's being awarded to the entity. So Exhibit A is the project description. So this provides a comprehensive description of the core functions, activities, or tasks associated with the grant award. Exhibit B, that outlines specific and targeted results expected from the activities as outlined in Exhibit A. It kind of serves as a checklist of what is to be accomplished throughout the term of the grant. Exhibit C, within that exhibit, you will see all the details associated on how to receive payment associated with the grant. Exhibit D, that is contact information. So that identifies and lists all the contact information for the parties. Some grantees may have 1 or more contacts listed. So there may be separate contacts for program, fiscal, or administrative functions of the grant. Exhibit E, the performance measures, that outlines performance-related reporting requirements, also describes the indicators or data points that the grantee must provide, and also includes method and time frame for submitting data reports. And then Exhibit F, performance standards, that outlines the minimal thresholds for acceptable performance. If the performance standards are available, then they most likely will correlate with the performance measures. And then Exhibit G, if there are any specific conditions, as we talked about, that's associated with the grant, maybe additional monitoring, or anything that is a result of the risk assessment and merit review, that would be outlined in great detail in Exhibit G. And then also you will see that in the grantor specific terms and project specific terms as well. Next slide. So any additional questions that you may have associated when it comes to completing your budget template, please contact myself and or John Barr, and we can help you navigate through those questions. And then also there is a budget and fiscal section on the FAQ link as well. So do we have time to take any questions right now?
So we are actually 5 minutes over, Tamika. So I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. If you need to jump off, you absolutely can. This is being recorded, but if you have questions and you would like to stay on the session, then we are more than happy to stay on with you and answer those questions. So you can feel free to unmute yourselves or post in the chat. But as of right now, there are a couple in the chat. Here we go. Tamika, do we want to address these?
I can address the last two. So there was a question for the NOFO, you must have a DUNS number and SAM.gov account. Yes, that is a pre-requirement. So in order to get past the pre-requirement qualifications, you must be able to provide a DUNS number and a SAMS.gov account. So the other question regarding the indirect cost rate is indirect based only on direct or on the total cost of the project? So if you're utilizing the 10% de minimis, it is based on the total modified direct cost. So 10% of those total modified direct cost. If you are utilizing already approved state negotiated rate or federal rates, then that is included in the total cost. But you also have to, there is an indirect cost template on the JTED budgets template as well. And so within that section, you will see all of the expenditures that can be included in your total base costs when computing your indirect cost rate. So I think those right now were the only questions related to fiscal and budget.
We had one more just come through. When is PRA submitted? It doesn't appear to be submitted with application.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the acronym PRA.
That's the program review. We have the ICQ and then the programmatic risk assessment.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So yes, so throughout the PRA is not associated with the submission process, but as you go through the process within the GATA portal, the agency will include that, but it's not a part of your submission documents. That's correct. The pre-award requirements should be going on right now. If you are planning to submit your grant applications, those pre-award requirements should be ongoing and completed. Some of those must be completed before submitting your application. Especially your DUNS number and your SAM.gov accounts. You have to have those when your application is submitted.
Okay. All right, thank you so much to both Tamika and Tammy for presenting a repeat session on both the NOFO review and the GATA. If you would like to refer to this session again or refer to the FAQ, you can do so on the NOFO website. It's on Illinois WorkNet's website under the JTED NOFO. If you simply Google JTED NOFO Illinois WorkNet, it will come right up actually, but it is also put in the chat for you during this session. And then I have saved the chat for you, Tamika and Tammy, so I can send that to you guys for the FAQ. And I believe that's all we have for today. So thank you so much to those of you who were able to stay over this meeting for the last 10 minutes and get your questions answered. And thank you so much to everyone. We look forward to your applications and have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.